It's been a really amazing week, a really quiet week, looking at all of the results of the election. I thought Trump was going to win, but I didn't expect to see the red wave that completely, decisively, and very quickly gave us a result. And the speed, the clarity, that was really interesting to me. But there's just so much to really unpack here, to take into consideration everything that happened, to come to terms with how we got where we are right now, and to interpret what that means for the future. So I wrote down a few different thoughts and just wanted to kind of go over each one, because I think that there's so many really interesting dynamics that have played a role and will continue to play a role in our political situation moving forward. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the power of silent voices. And especially on the left, so often we see people who are very boisterous. They're very loud and vocal about where they stand on things. And it's easy to look at those people because those are the people who will be the most likely to participate in polls. They're the most likely to go out into a public square and hold a sign or wave a flag or do something to draw attention to what they're passionate about. But there's a lot of guys, there's a lot of quiet Americans who just go about their lives. They don't really spend a lot of time necessarily trying to make a big deal out of things. They're not necessarily trying to go up on a rooftop and tell the world where they stand. They just mind their own business. And that silent majority really, I think, weighed in very heavily on the outcome of this presidential election. I also think that it's quite plausible that a lot of people on the left kind of forgot that that silent majority exists. They were petitioning to the interests of LGBTQIA plus people, maybe to liberal women's issues, to a specific group of people who would resonate strongly with their position. And within their echo chamber, they could very easily convince themselves that their niche issues like identity politics, gender issues, abortion issues, that those were the main things that were concerning Americans as a whole. The reality is that that was not really the main thing that was concerning to Americans. And the people who were validating the notion of a blue wave that was just a guaranteed thing that was going to happen, well, it was really just an echo chamber. And the rest of America was, in many cases, just quietly minding its business, not going out to make its position clear necessarily. But we still did have an opinion, and we went out and we voted. And so I think you can't say enough about the importance of actions, which speak louder than words. I also wanted to talk about how things like tyranny around the time of COVID and the censorship, the vaccine mandate, all of those things that really made it clear that the government was willing to fuse corporate interests and executive power to use media companies, technology companies as a de facto extension to enforce the will of the government, to be the voice, the bully pulpit of the government. That was very concerning. And feeling like in the time of COVID, that we didn't have the freedom to make decisions about what we felt was safe for ourselves in terms of health decisions without facing revilement or stigma or being automatically dumped into a bucket and being told that if you aren't comfortable getting a vaccine because maybe you just aren't 100% sure it's safe, then you must be by default some sort of a far right extremist and maybe even a enemy or a threat to the state. Those things really played a huge role in pushing a lot of us who would have otherwise been much more moderate further to the right. And it very much undermined subsequent efforts on the part of the left to say that they wanted to campaign on the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom from censorship, and body autonomy. Because it's very difficult as a guy to sit there and listen to people say we're all about body autonomy when we're talking about it in the context of abortion. But if we're talking about you making a decision about whether you want to get a vaccine, then we're going to say that you don't have body autonomy in that particular situation. It really becomes very clear that the government, in the case of the activist left, had a position that they could play God in people's lives, and they were all about campaigning on freedom and autonomy as long as you agreed with their position. But if you didn't agree with their position, then that wound up being a complete lie. And that was a major event. It's just something you can't really forget about. You can't have someone threaten to take your job away when you aren't trying to do anything to harm anybody, and then have them come back and say, let's get your vote to give you another 4 years of that. Another thing would be the rule of law. And there's been so much upheaval in the big cities over the last few years, thinking of things like BLM and all of those riots. I remember going to even medium-sized cities and seeing windows smashed out of stores and feeling like things would never go back to normal because people were just out destroying things, smashing up downtowns and turning them into places that were no longer safe. And today, we still haven't gotten that back. For example, just yesterday, I was looking at a news article from Seattle where it said that somebody had been downtown Seattle in the International District stabbing people over the course of 48 hours. So in a 48-hour period, this person had stabbed 10 people, all of whom were, well, some of which were in critical condition, some of which had been released, I believe. But why would I want to go to Seattle when there's that sort of thing happening? And it's just really difficult to overlook the fact that the activist left has sent out the signal that it really was not concerned with the rule of law, with having peace and security in our cities. They were always implying that if bad things happened, we should take the side of the people who are doing crime, the people who are creating unrest. We should always try to look at things from their perspective and possibly even view their bad behavior as evidence that we as a society have failed them. And as a result, as cities have become increasingly unsafe, it's become more difficult to think that you want to live in the cities, in the big liberal strongholds. And so a lot of people have been moving out of the cities, and they've been going to try to find more moderate places, places where they feel safe, places where they don't feel like they have to look over their shoulder just to walk down the street. And that's not really a radical political position. That's just rational self-interest. If you don't feel safe, you're not going to want to spend a lot of time hanging out in that place that feels like it might be a place where you're going to get robbed or harmed. And that played a very significant role in pushing a lot of people out of cities that were guaranteed to be liberal strongholds and more into places like Nevada or Pennsylvania, where we flipped swing states in favor of the Republican ticket this time. Loose immigration policies. There's a lot of people who have come to the United States legally who are migrants, and they don't like to see people coming into the United States not following due process. Those people often also will tell you that they're proud to be Americans because they know that there's certain things about their home countries, about other countries in the world, which are less than ideal. And they don't want to see those problems replicated in the United States. They actually came to the United States because they wanted to leave behind those failed policies and come to a place that was freer, that was safer, and that was more prosperous. So illegal immigration is something that legal immigrants, the legal immigrants that actually vote, oppose. And when the left started to signal that they are pro-illegal immigrant, I think that they believed that that would be attractive to legal immigrants, that they would be more likely to get votes from the migrant voter if they had a easy on illegal immigrants policy. But I think that backfired, because legal migrants are not against the concept of a legal path to immigration into the United States. It's actually quite often the opposite. Then there's the issue of lobbying, specifically with the purpose of gaining the LGBTQIA plus community's support, a group which is ultimately a minority in our society. Maybe we're talking about 5%, maybe we're talking about 1% of the population. Whatever it is, it's not a very big percentage of the American population that identifies as part of that category. The left also was reaching out to try to earn the vote of the radicalized women. And they were trying to do that by saying that men are evil, men are oppressive, men are toxic. And so when you try to get the vote of the gay community by being anti-straight people, and you try to get the women's vote by being anti-men, inevitably you set yourself up to fail, because yes, you may get a certain small subsection of the population which will vote for you and will support you, but you do it at the expense of a larger and more broad spectrum of the voting public, which you have deliberately pushed away because you've implied that they are not welcome at the table. You kick out a big group so that you can get the favor of a small group. And if you do that, it's not going to be a significant shock to find that while you do have a passionate small group of people that are on your side, there's a much bigger group of people who will silently leave the room and go find a lobby of their own. We see this in the case of people like Elon Musk, for example. Tesla has always been the signature of the progressive liberal ethos: electric cars, innovation, technology, STEM. So how is it that the leader of Tesla winds up on the Trump ticket? And I think the reason for this is because ultimately Elon Musk was not pro-censorship. He didn't agree with everything that the left was doing. And as a result, because the left has become a bit more extreme and unwilling to have anyone at the table under the party tent that doesn't 100% align with them. They essentially said, you must be a part of the enemy side. If you're not with us, you are part of the enemy. And so Elon Musk was villainized. He was villainized for things like wanting to fight censorship on Twitter. He was villainized for having opinions that didn't necessarily align with the mainstream liberal agenda. And so he was essentially just kicked out completely. And so he found a place that was a little bit more in line with empowering him to represent his own rational self-interest in a way that wouldn't punish him for his personal position and identity. We saw the same basic thing happen with people like Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., both of whom were former Democrats, people who wanted to identify with the Democratic ticket. And yet the Democratic Party left them behind and said, if you don't agree with everything and you don't do everything we want you to do, you aren't welcome. And so those independent-leaning Democrats found themselves, too, out in the cold. And then they consolidated and joined the Trump ticket because that was the place where there was a large tent with room for everyone underneath it. And that led to more votes going to the Republicans, votes which might otherwise have gone to a moderate Democratic candidate, votes which might otherwise have gone to an independent, but instead they all rallied under the banner of the Republican Party because the Democratic Party had gone so far left that there no longer was any welcome for anyone that didn't align with them. It's kind of like if I went to church because I respect Christianity and I enjoy the atmosphere and I enjoy the music and I enjoy the message, but then I have that conversation with the people who attend the church and they say, well, if you don't believe 100% in everything the Bible teaches and you aren't 100% going to embrace the doctrine of the church and devote your life to our interpretation of the faith, then you aren't welcome here, and we're going to never accept you fully until you get on board. Well, then at that point, I'm not going to hate them. I'm just not going to come back. Now, prediction markets, they saw this coming a mile away. The prediction markets, the gambling markets, where people are going to bet on the outcome of the election, were pro-Trump for weeks before the election happened. So how is it that the seemingly unserious betting markets could see what polls and legacy media couldn't? And the answer is because it was always easy to see. All of these things are easy to see if you just look at them objectively. But the media has been used as a tool of propaganda. And the left has been propagating a message which aligns with what it wants to be true, not what it actually thinks is true in a purely objective, honest way. When you're putting your money on the line, when you're betting with dollars on who's going to win, it's a lot easier to make the right decision because, you know, why wouldn't you, right? You'll make the right decision when you are trying to win and you're going to be financially incentivized to win. You can deceive yourself much more easily when you don't have that financial incentive, and instead you are publishing propaganda and deceiving others and also deceiving yourself. I thought it was really interesting how right before the election, there suddenly were these news articles saying that Kamala Harris had swung into a more favorable position at the last minute. It looked like she was on track to win. I thought that was really interesting because it just didn't seem to be true. But it doesn't really come as a surprise when you realize that the media is largely controlled by people who wanted the Harris team to win. If you want to only look for evidence of a specific outcome, that's confirmation bias. Eventually, you will find something that will align with what you're looking for. Legacy leftists have presented the notion that the Trump campaign is essentially fascist, that Trump is like Hitler, and those sorts of very inflammatory rhetoric have helped to contribute to the risk of things like assassination attempts and the militant behavior of people who feel that doing harm to others or destroying property or in some way becoming violent might be in the best interest of their country. Because, let's face it, if you think that Donald Trump is the same as Hitler, then why wouldn't you decide that maybe it's worth sacrificing your life to take him out? That's a very dangerous thing to be putting out there and trying to use as campaign rhetoric. I also think that it's interesting how inevitably after the Trump victory, there's young voters who feel concerned, who may even feel frightened. And then their mental health is compromised because they feel like they've just lost everything. And the reason they feel that way is because legacy leftist leadership has been propagating the message that the other side is not just a different perspective. They're not actually even legitimate Americans. And that's a shame. It's a shame to try to win so hard that you're willing to spread lies and hyperbolic claims about the other side. And this is to some degree true on both sides. Politicians will do this. They will say things about the other side which are the absolute extreme caricature. Whether it's people on the left saying that people on the right are like Hitler, or people on the right saying that the people on the left are communists. That's an extreme characterization. And it's not really fair because this political cycle is not the same as what was going on in Germany or Russia in the first half of the 20th century. It's a different time, a different place, different people. And we shouldn't be incentivizing incitement of people in this way. It's not fair to anyone because it's deceptive, and it also undermines credibility for anyone who engages in that type of behavior. I do think it's important to mention the fact that in this case, in 2020, the U.S. political process worked. Let's just be honest about it. There's people who want to say that the election was stolen in 2020. I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know. It's possible that there was some election fraud. In fact, it's probable that in every election there's some kind of fraud. But is it probable that there was something so widespread and large scale that it actually swung and changed the outcome of the election? I have never seen anything to give me cause to believe that. I think that it's interesting how, especially in the last decade, anytime somebody wins, someone else on the other side is going to stand up and say they won because they cheated. We've seen it on the left. We've seen it on the right. The bottom line is, in 2020, we could see the writing on the wall. The pendulum was swinging toward a Biden victory. Whether you wanted to see that or not, that's what it looked like. And that's what happened. And whether you like to see it now or not, all the writing was on the wall that we were swinging hard toward a departure from the radical left and an embracing of a more right-wing position, which is what we got. So even though we can say that we believe that the outcome of the election is very important, and we believe that different aspects of our freedom or our liberty is on the line, and the stakes are high, it's also important to stop, pause, and acknowledge that our political system, in terms of electing leadership, we've seen it work. It's been working every time for a very long time. And that's one of the best things about the American process of democracy, that people don't always get their way, that the pendulum does swing back and forth, and maybe we get a landslide red wave this time, but there will come a time when it's once again the time and the season for the other side to get another day in the sun. That's how it's supposed to be. It was that way when Obama came into office. Obama went into office in 2008, 2009, with both the House and the Senate and the popular vote. And he had a vibe about his campaign. He had an identity around his campaign. He inspired people with the way he spoke. It was just a phenomena. It was something incredible to witness. And I think it's fascinating that this political season, I saw that once again in a different way, different political party. But all of those viral moments like Trump at the French fry counter, and Trump in a garbage truck, and Joe Biden wearing a Trump hat for some ridiculous and unknown reason. All of these crazy things, not least of which would be Trump getting shot at and coming out with that epic, incredible piece of photography as he put his fist up in the air and said, "Fight," right after he'd been clipped on the ear. Such incredible scenes, incredible moments in this campaign. And Barack Obama also had a very incredible campaign, which was inspiring to me now, quite a few years ago. I think that it's a real privilege to be able to see landmark campaigns, which are memorable and which are special. And that leads me to something which we should mention, at least briefly, and that is that the Harris campaign failed to win in large part because it didn't have any of that. It didn't campaign on anything special. It didn't have anything about it that was truly unique. It was anti-Trump, it was pro-abortion, and you can't really think of anything else that it might have been. It just didn't really resonate. It wasn't memorable. It wasn't special. It was vanilla in every aspect of the term. And that's a big part of why it fell flat. You can't campaign purely on not being your opponent. You have to have something that's substantive and unique that applies to people all across the board. I think we have increasingly departed from the era of pragmatic liberalism, the kind of liberalism that can be the voice of the entire nation, the kind of liberalism that has room for everyone under the tent, that is intellectual and conveys itself as having open arms to all different perspectives and ideas. I hope that as time goes on, the Democratic Party will return to that. I hope it will go back to center and become less of a activist left and more of a pragmatic liberalism in the classical sense. I think it's bittersweet to see a conservative victory, because deep down inside I know that I view myself as a liberal. And the only reason why I choose to be fundamentally conservative today is because the left has become progressively more extreme. And so it feels oftentimes like there really isn't much of a choice. The right has a better position than the left. But that doesn't change the fact that pragmatic liberalism, the kind of a vibe that I remember when downtown Seattle was filled with shops back when Macy's had all 6 floors of their flagship department store filled with merchandise, and it just felt like it was a young, vibrant, progressive place that had the vibe of intellectualism and sustainability. I hope that we can go back to that. Because as it is, the left has become a shell of much of what it once was. So moving on, I did not expect to see a stock market rally, and I maintain it feels like the stock market is overvalued. It does not feel like there's any fundamentals that would give us reason to believe that the stock market should be rallying in a really wild and crazy way. I do not like hype that feels like it is driven by some sort of irrational thing. And that's kind of what I think we have been seeing this past week. So the base nature of reality hasn't been reinvented just because Trump won the election. So I think it's very important to pause when people are getting greedy, when they're getting hyped up, and when they're saying, well, the good times are here again. The market is going to rally until the end of time now. Maybe. Maybe not, though. From what I've heard, Warren Buffett hasn't been getting on board with that hype. He's a pretty traditional investor, and he tends to be more likely to adhere to that principle of be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. I was talking to a friend of mine just yesterday, and I said something about not being on board with the rally and not being on board with cryptocurrency and all of this stuff. And he said, you're just bitter because we are making money and you're not. And I said to him, well, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, sure. It would be nice to make a bunch of money off of a rally. But at the core of it, what I can't shake is the fact that if I can't understand something and it doesn't make sense, even if it appears to be working well, it's important to have pause. It's important to trust your gut, because sometimes everybody gets on board with something and they're just riding that hype train. And that's pride that comes before a fall. So be careful when everyone's saying, oh, wow, this is amazing. You got to get on board. Maybe you shouldn't. I also think it's been interesting how the transfer of power has been suspiciously quiet this week. We've seen Joe Biden come out smiling, beaming ear to ear on stage to congratulate Trump and invite him to the White House. Kamala Harris oddly gave a speech that I actually thought was pretty moving and very well delivered to concede gracefully to Trump, reiterate her faith in our political system, and encourage people to respect the peaceful transfer of power. As I've read news articles over the last few days, I've seen a few things that are the normal run-of-the-mill, people being disappointed if their side didn't win, but nothing that actually attracted my attention in any meaningful way. It just seems like the news cycle got very quiet. Social media has been pretty quiet. People have been pretty respectful. And even around the world, the reaction of foreign leaders has been amicable. President Putin respecting and congratulating Trump for his victory. Entities like Hamas and Zelensky saying that they, in their own particular way, hope that we can find a way to create a path for peace. It's been a strangely peaceful week, and it's felt like a nice pause to be able to celebrate a victory, to enjoy a relative calm, and maybe to rest and take advantage of the opportunity to prepare for the challenges which may lie ahead. I don't know if it's the calm before the storm, if we're in the eye of the hurricane and something really wild is right around the corner, or if maybe somehow it's not too good to be true and we are about to enter a new age of prosperity for America. I hope that the latter is true. Probability is that it's a bit of both. There will be some good times ahead, and there will also be some adversity. So we should be optimistic, but not necessarily blindly optimistic. We should remain vigilant. So, there's a lot of people who are disappointed because their side lost. But it is also important to put into perspective that possibly a win on the right is not a win that comes at the expense of others. There's this notion that just because the conservatives won, the liberals are going to somehow be marginalized, that they're going to lose their voice, that the average liberal American is no longer going to be able to express themselves freely in America. And that simply isn't true. The best example I can think of to echo is simply that under the administration of Donald Trump in his first term, we didn't see America devolve into an episode of The Handmaid's Tale. And despite the conservative party's reputation of being a place devoted to traditional values, a place where the Christians are more likely to align themselves. Trump has never been a person who is defined by extreme religious fundamentalist ideologies. By no measure. He's a guy who has lived the life of a successful, high wealth businessman. That's really about it. If you think that a guy who spends his life building casinos is really the face of extreme religious fundamentalism, take a few steps back. A few years ago, Trump was most well known for his line of high-quality men's neckties. He's not an extremist. And while he does come across as hyperbolic, let's be real, the left has been just as extreme when it comes to saying crazy things about the dire consequences of letting the other side win. What is unique is that we've seen a true landmark red wave to win the House, the Senate, and the White House, as well as the popular vote. That's a very unique thing. It's something that hasn't happened since Barack Obama in 2008. And add to it Trump's winning non-consecutively, and you have something which is a true, rare, maybe even once-in-a-lifetime political moment. An amazing combination of events, which is a privilege to be able to have an armchair position to watch. Now, the Democrats had a significant win when Barack Obama came into office back in 2009. It was actually much like today. There was a lot of enthusiasm around Barack Obama. There was a lot of hope about the positive influence that Obama would have on people's lives. And then what we saw was that as time went on, the Democrats lost traction and they lost their grip on the House and Senate and eventually on the presidency. Probably partly because no president is God. They're just a human being. And as they go into office, they make a lot of promises, which ultimately are a reflection of their goals, not necessarily a reflection of what's actually going to become reality. The reality is that quite often our lives will be made better not by a president or a Congress, but by we ourselves as individuals. See, the truth is, I don't think that the Biden administration has had very good policies, and I don't think that they've done a good job of projecting power for the United States. I don't think that the last 4 years have been very successful for our nation, economically, spiritually, patriotically. And yet the truth is, my life personally is more prosperous than it was 4 years ago. My life is better than it was 4 years ago in many ways. Not because of what politicians have done, but because of things that I have done. Things that have changed in my personal economy in my personal life, in my personal understanding and lens through which I see the world. So as we look at the happenings and the events that have been unfolding and will unfold, let's remember that we should live our lives on a basis of pursuing our own destiny, our own faith, our own hope for creating a better life for ourselves. Don't look at a politician and expect them to be a savior. All of that being said, I also think that the more of a high note we go into this new Trump presidency with, the more risk there is that the hype will fail and fade, and people will wake up and they will realize, you know, Trump is just a guy and he wasn't able to fix everything and make everything different. And then that enthusiasm will begin to fade as people come back down to earth and they realize that campaign promises often are much more muted when it actually comes time to see them turned into realities. And yet, we do have the House and the Senate, which puts the Republican Party in an amazing position to be able to get things done and to create policies which will reverberate throughout at least the next decade of America's political future. The ethos of the right, tradition, rugged individualism, all of these things are things that... Now I'm distracted because I was auto running in the game and then ran into a mob and I killed myself, which is terrible. So I guess I need to get out of here. In any case, what I was trying to say before I got interrupted is that the right, tradition, rugged individualism, self-reliance, these are things which rural America will always espouse more than urban centers. And those are kind of timeless principles. The desire to be able to fall back on yourself, to be true to yourself when everything else is uncertain. I think that these are things which are timeless. And that's one reason why maybe conservative values are easier to maintain momentum for long term. There will be new innovations, new technologies, all sorts of changes which will come. And yet in the end, there's that desire we have to find our own path, to climb our own mountains, and to steal a little bit of Kamala's word salad, to contemplate what can be unburdened by what has been. Politicians may let us down and fail us, but we can always pour another cup of coffee and take a deep breath and go for a walk under the stars. And I think that that desire to find your own way in the world is a foundationally conservative principle. When all of the busyness of the world fades, we don't really look to politicians. We look within ourselves. We look to our tradition. We look to our sense of faith. We look to a value system that we've figured out for ourselves. If there is anything that's bittersweet in all of this, to me, it's that I look at the political changes which have happened, and I think about how there's people on the left who are rallying for something. There's people on the right who are rallying for something. And as you guys know, I voted for Trump, and I support Trump, and I'm excited to see in this moment a conservative victory. And yet, as an individual, I also believe in being a true neutral, not in trying to win because one particular side deserves to always win, but rather always trying to fight for a sense of balance in the world. It's convenient to be able to fall back on a comforting lie, to be able to say that you've picked the right side to root for. But the truth is, while most people will pick a side and then just rally behind the flag, the closest thing to truth we can find in the world is to be pragmatic enough to look at both sides of the equation, to understand that everything has its place and its season, and then to proceed to do our best to walk that line, sometimes to be an advocate for the right, sometimes to be an advocate for the left. That's a lonely path, because even when you're in the company of people who you kind of agree with, you also kind of realize we're not really the same. We're not really the same because I choose the middle way. And the middle way is a lonely way, because there's not a lot of people who choose to take it. It's like that straight and narrow path in the Bible. It said that few there be that find it, because wide is the path that leads to destruction. And it's true in life. There's always a lot of wide paths. Paths decorated with pomp and circumstance and campaign recruitment ads saying you need to sign up for this, you need to jump on this bandwagon, and if you do, your life will be better than ever before. But the reality is, we should, no matter what side we find ourselves on, we should always remember that the truth lies somewhere in between. I've always loved the quote by Judge Learned Hand, who said, "The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too certain that it is right." And there will come a time, probably, when the pendulum of momentum shifts too far to the right, when we have to say it's necessary to take a stand against radical conservative activism, in the same way that I have said lately many times that we must take a stand against radical left activism, because neither of them are good in their extremes. And I also think, in closing, it's important to be empathetic with people. It's important to not be so desirous to win that we drive other people's opinions into the closet or into extinction. I don't like it when leftists are pushing some sort of weird, woke, gender identity politics on me in my favorite video game. But does that mean that we shouldn't respect the right of other people, no matter how weird we may think they are sometimes, to feel safe, to be free, and to be respected? Of course, we should care about all these things. And that leads me to my final point. We as Americans have more in common than we have that divides us. Even if it seems like the political parties of the left and the right, the Republicans and Democrats, are polar opposites, as we see a balkanization, a polarization, a dramatic, distinct cultural difference between the conservative, traditional values of America's rural communities, offset against the collectivist, liberal views of our cities. The truth is, we all benefit from the opportunity to live in a progressive, liberal, Western democracy. And so, let's take a moment now to lay aside all of the rhetoric and to remember that at the end of the day, we are, even if we're passionate about the positions we hold, not bound to hold those positions unchanged forever, and not so very different that we can't afford to still stand side by side. Wherever you find yourself, always stay safe, stay prepared, try to have fun in life, celebrate the life you have, and good luck on your adventure. Till next time.